speaker is Kimberleigh Dinkins, who's the Senior Conservation Associate for the Save Manatee Club of Florida. Kimberleigh is a graduate of the University of Science. She's got a Bachelor's of Science degree in Environmental Science. She also has a master's degree in the science of soil and water science. She has over 20 years of experience working with stakeholder groups such as ours and other groups in trying to organize to try to help the manatees. And if you have paid any attention to the news lately, you have seen that the manatees are being challenged considerably, especially downstate. But it's not unique to just downstate. We have issues here in Northeast Florida that at some point we'll be glad to share with you. So with that said, rather than me talking on any more, I'll turn the meeting over to Kimberleigh, and she'll be sharing her screen.
All right, so my name is Kim Dinkins. I am with Save the Manatee Club. I've actually been with the organization for a little less than a year, so I'm kind of new to the whole manatee world. My background is actually more on the water quality, water supply planning, and then just community planning. And then I've also worked with DEP on their basin management action plan. So the water quality side is kind of where I've spent the majority of my career. But we'll talk a little bit today about just manatees in general, where they're from, where they live, what our threats are, which are numerous, the unusual mortality event that many of you have already been, maybe are aware of, and then the 2022 legislation that we're paying attention to, and then how to get involved with manatee issues. So in the Western world, we have 3 species of manatees. They are the West Indian manatee. Well, we have the West Indian manatee that has 2 subspecies. That's the Florida subspecies, and then the Antillean, which is your Latin American and down into South America. The West Indian manatee typically is found in Florida, but then during the summer months, they can migrate as far north as the Carolinas and as far west as Texas, typically staying a little bit smaller range, but you know, the majority of them hang out here on our coasts. Then we have the Antillean subspecies, again, in that South American area, the Amazonian manatee, and then the West African manatee. On the east side of Africa and into Australia, we have dugongs. That's a different family of Trichocadae, if I'm saying it correctly. So there's the 2 families, the manatees and then the dugongs. There were 2 species of dugongs. One was Steller's sea cow and then dugong. The Steller's sea cow were found near Alaska and Russia, but they were hunted to extinction within 27 years of being found. So in Florida, you know manatees, you probably all seen them. They're large, slow-moving marine mammals. They live in a variety of aquatic habitats, and I'm always surprised when I hear people saying, oh, I saw a manatee in this canal, or I saw a manatee here. And just recently in Crystal River, there was a manatee rescue because one ended up at a flood stage over a road and then had to be rescued to be put back. So they really can get anywhere. They're generalist herbivores. They'll eat whatever's available to them. They migrate seasonally, like I mentioned before, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that's important behavior for us to recognize and adapt and protect. So there we have an estimated 10,000 manatees in Florida. I want to say that that's a little high. The latest synoptic surveys were done in 2019, and that showed about 8,000 mammals. And a synoptic survey is what the Fish and Wildlife Commission does, where they, in the winter time, when the majority of manatees are in Florida, they'll fly the state and count manatees during the, let's say, November to March months and try to get an estimate that way. They are protected federally and statewide. Many of you may know that they were downlisted from endangered to threatened, but in terms of the way that they were listed on the Endangered Species Act, they have the same protections that a endangered species would. It's just the funding that's an issue. That's the biggest difference. So in Florida, manatees migrate. In the winter time, you'll find them restricted to southern Florida. They suffer from cold stress in temperatures that are less than 72 degrees. So they're restricted to southern Florida. They suffer from cold stress in waters that are less than 68 degrees if they're in there for a prolonged period of time. They remain in areas of warm water refuges, which is, our springs, which are so important for their habitat, but also power plants, which are artificial sites. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why those are a risk for or a threat for manatees. They have high site fidelity. So the moms teach their babies where to go to stay warm in the winter time. So that's one of the reasons that this Indian River Lagoon issue is so concerning, because it could, it takes generations for manatees to sometimes adapt. Now we've had some good, interesting stories this year where we're finding some of those Indian River Lagoon manatees coming up into the Blue Spring area. So that's encouraging. So we'll have to just see how that plays out. In the summertime, again, they disperse throughout waterways into neighboring states. They can be found, again, all the way up into the Carolinas and as far west as Texas. They can be about 10 feet long. They weigh about 1,200 pounds, depending on where they are. We found that in Blue Spring, our manatees are typically larger than they are in other areas of the state. So that's interesting. The biggest one was 13 feet and weighed about 3,500 pounds. The females are bigger than the males. And this is just like a little diagram showing you about their size. They are, again, generalist herbivores. They are the only marine mammal that is strictly an herbivore. They eat eelgrass, mangroves, salt marsh, and SAV. SAV is is an acronym for submerged aquatic vegetation. They can consume up to 10% of their body weight every day. So that's 100 pounds of vegetation a day. Because eelgrass goes dormant in the winter, sometimes manatees have to choose between staying warm and feeding. But typically in a healthy ecosystem, there will be plenty of eelgrass or other grasses to sustain a manatee in the wintertime. Manatees can live over 50 years, and we have a manatee that we are aware of that lived to be 69 years old. They reproduce at 3 to 4 years of age. They have one calf every 2 to 5 years, and oftentimes they won't typically have twins, but we do have some manatees that are pretty prolific reproducers. So we have a few who we know have had, upwards of 10 children over their 10 calves over their lifetime. Most of the mating occurs in spring and summer. And if you've been in our waterways in Florida, you might have seen these mating herds. They're just large congregation of manatees. It's probably the most active that you'll see them. 13-month gestation period. So quite a long time when we're talking about having to, when we're talking about a large number of deaths, it could be a potential large impact to the overall population for a long period of time. And then the calves weigh about 60 to 70 pounds when they're born. They stay with their moms for about 2 years. We have, you might be familiar with this, the manatee tracking program. If you've ever seen a manatee that looks like they've got a buoy attached to them, can be a little concerning for folks, but if you get a good look at the manatee and you see that it's wrapped just around that dorsal part of their body, they're loosely attached and they will come off with any sort of pressure. So they use sonar, VHF, and satellite transmitters, and they are, again, designed to come off if they get entangled. If you see a tagged manatee, we encourage you to report that to FWC. You'll see this phone number often. It's 1-888-404-3922, and that's the same number that you'll use if you ever see a manatee in distress. They have no natural predators. Humans are really, I'll go back. Humans are really their only natural predator. We have some manatees who have made friends with alligators, as you can see. So they are protected under the Endangered Species Act as of 1967. There actually were protections for manatees in Florida as far back as the 1800s, so early 1900s, late 1800s. The Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972 also addresses manatees, and then we as a state have the Florida Manatee Sanctuary Act that came into place in 1978. The state agency that is responsible for manatee protections is FWC. They are basically the Wildlife Services arm within the state. You may be aware that they were downlisted from endangered to threatened in 2017, and the numbers have grown, but so have the threats. Within 2021, we had 1,101 manatee deaths, which was classified as this unusual mortality event. So before we talk about the unusual mortality event, we'll talk about some of the threats. Watercraft collisions oftentimes make up between 30 and 40% of manatee deaths in a year. In 2021, there were 82 fatalities due to watercraft where the cause of death was known. We had a little bit of a tricky situation in 2021 with COVID and a lack of necropsies and being able to study what caused manatees deaths. But that 82 is quite a high number. They can hear boats, but they don't move very fast. So especially when you're looking at shallow waters, the risk for manatees is pretty high. And the thing that is very interesting is that the majority, you can see on the right-hand side here, I think it's my right hand, is that the majority of the length of the body is the manatee's lung. They have very dense bones. So oftentimes what kills manatees with watercraft collisions is not the wounds that they sustain, but the impact to their lungs. So they'll end up with punctured lungs and broken ribs. So obviously there are some things we can do. We've established idle speed and no wake zones, manatee protection areas in Florida. So just pay attention to those signs and look out for manatees. If you're on a boat, wear polarized sunglasses. And the best thing for a kid to be able to do is to be able to look out your boat from those manatee footprints. So put a spotter on guard. Again, going slow, wearing polarized sunglasses, look out for those snouts and footprints. And then again, report those, any injuries or anything to Fish and Wildlife. We provide signs if you're interested and you live on a waterway and you'd like to receive one of these yellow signs, we can provide that for you. Other threats are entanglements. They get entangled in monofilament lines, crab traps, and debris. We always ask that you put your line in one of these containers that you'll find at basically any marina in the state. We did have a rare occasion of a manatee. This one on the lower right-hand side was entangled in a bike tire. He did get free, and so we've seen him around since. He's doing okay. Again, call me at FWC if you see an entanglement. Don't try to remove it yourself. One of the biggest threats to manatees at this time is your loss of warm water habitat. They have been congregating around power plants because they're warm year-round. Some of these older plants are being retired, and we don't have a contingency plan in place. Again, those manatees have high site fidelity. The other place that you'll find manatees in the winter times is natural springs, but those have been reduced due to pumping. I would say somewhat through withdrawal. Somewhat through pumping, but often a lot of it through dams. You all might be familiar with the Rodman Reservoir, which blocks off 20 springs to manatees. They are, again, susceptible to cold stress and water temperatures. And this cold stress is actually a disease. They're difficult to recover from that cold stress. They do die when they are in prolonged water that's prolonged less than 68 degrees. Other things are harassment. Manatees don't typically like to be around people. There are some locations where people are always there. And so the manatees who stick around are used to it. But we do have some evidence of manatees in the St. John's area not going to springs that might provide good habitat, and we think that that might be linked to some harassment issues. So it obviously alters their behavior. It can separate mothers and calves, which is obviously not a good situation. And if the manatees are leaving their warm water sites, it can be fatal for them again. Harmful algal blooms, not just on the West Coast, but on the East Coast, are another threat to manatees. They occur when algae grows out of control. There are toxins in certain blue-green algae, microcystins, that will inhibit their respiration. And then on the red tide side, they end up with a type of shock that prevents them from coming up to breathe. They can cause seizures and drowning. And then the long-term effect of algal blooms is that it blocks light to seagrass and then affects their forage, their food source. So the big thing that's going on right now is in the Indian River Lagoon, which spans from Volusia County all the way down to like the Sebastian Inlet. The Indian River Lagoon is basically 3 lagoons. There's not a lot of mixing in those lagoons. So there's just not a lot of transfer of water. It's home to thousands of manatees in the summer, and then almost 70% of the winter population of the East Coast. Since 2011, so there was a big shift, a big algal bloom in 2011, and that's been the the forage loss has been attributed to that first event of the algal bloom, and then just recurring algal blooms after that. So again, over the last 10 years, this number says 58. I would say it's upwards of 65% overall decline in seagrass in the Indian River Lagoon. And then in certain areas of the Indian River Lagoon, it's just completely bare. So 90 to 100% in certain areas of the IRL. You can see this picture from 2013, where you have all these nice seagrass beds and then nothing. So the UME, we've actually had 2 UMEs, one related to the 2011 die-off. And well, just to give you an explanation of what that is, it's basically that it is a stranding that's unexpected, involves a significant die-off of any marine mammal population and demands an immediate response. And these are determined by NOAA. So there's a committee that meets, evaluates the deaths, and then determines whether or not a UME is put in place. It's declared for manatees if there are more than 7 carcasses in 72 hours. And the most common UME for manatees is red tide up until this more prolonged one, which is lasting over a year. In December 2020, manatees started dying in large numbers. Initially, scientists thought, or researchers thought, that it might be due to a prolonged cold snap. Since January 2022, so that's this year, we have lost almost 200 manatees. So we're on the same track to have similar numbers as last year. Those carcasses are showing severe emaciation. Up to 40% of them are underweight. We will have atrophy of muscle, fat, and organs. The manatees that have been rescued are showing signs of starvation. This manatee on the left-hand side is an emaciated manatee. You can tell that the difference in the body type between the manatee on the left and the manatee on the right. They'll have like this peanut-shaped head, and their folds underneath, not that you would typically see an underneath of a manatee, but that peanut-shaped head is really indicative of the emaciation. So these guys were rescued, and then they were recovered later that year. So that's exciting. I just hope that we don't see them again this year. So why did it happen? Again, during the wintertime, manatees have to stay warm or find food. Oftentimes those warm spaces and the food are in the same place, and they can fast for a couple of days at a time, but just not prolonged periods. Again, they historically didn't move north of Sebastian, but they are moving further north because we have these power plants that provide that warm water habitat. Again, loss of historic warm water sites due to development, dams, and habitat loss. The seagrass die-off that I mentioned before, there's less than 40% of the seagrass that was historically found in the Indian River Lagoon is still there. This map just kind of shows you where the majority of those carcasses were found, where the deaths have occurred. It's obviously that East Coast. We're also seeing animals die though on the West Coast. So although the UME is just strictly the East Coast of Florida, we do still have manatees dying on the West Coast. And those are typically going to be your boat strikes, your natural causes, not the starvation issues that we have on the East Coast. So what are we doing? Save the Manatee Club has been advocating for additional funds for necropsies and additional surveys. We are flying drones to see if we can do more robust kind of seeing, not health assessments, but looking for struggling animals so that we can get more help to them more quickly. The federal government has established a unified command, which is their response to these emergency events. There is a supplemental feeding program and pilot type program in Brevard County, and they're looking for additional. Fish and Wildlife Commission is looking for additional locations. Our rehabilitation sites are struggling. They are at capacity. So we're trying to get as many healthy animals out of those rehabilitation sites so that we can bring the more acute animals in. There are a number of organizations on the East Coast working on habitat restoration. The issue there, though, is the substrate that seagrasses would typically grow in is flocculent. It doesn't have a lot of, there's not a lot of ability for those seagrasses to adhere. And so we're having to do like backup programs. So putting in clam beds and trying to get the water filtered to a point where we can actually put in some seagrasses. But that's going on throughout the state. And then again, I continue to advocate for federal and state funding. How can you help? Well, at your home, reduce the use of fertilizers. I'm probably going to be preaching to the choir here. Recycle your monofilament line. Don't feed or water manatees. If you live in near a water body, leave that natural bank of vegetation. Practice safe boating. Be active in your community, which you're doing by listening to this program today. And then report those sick or injured manatees. I have a couple of slides in here just how to spot a manatee. I don't know. Manatees floating high in the water. The natural behavior is this mating herd. You might see them floating high in the water at that time. Fresh wounds. The manatee with a pink fresh wound is different than a manatee with a healed white wound. Rapid breathing. They can stay underwater for up to 20 minutes if they're resting, but if they're really, trying to just stay up on that water surface, you just want to pay attention and make sure that they're not struggling. Cold stress looks like these white spots all over their body. They can be very skinny and be very lethargic. It's hard to tell with a manatee because they're pretty lethargic after most of the time, but there's a little bit of a difference in that they just are looks like they're struggling to move rather than just not moving. But really those white lesions on their snout is the telltale for that. And then again, calling that hotline, it's just so important that you do that. Staying with the manatee if you're able to measure its respiration to see if there's something that might be wrong, and then take some photos. So I think the majority of you are interested in legislation that we're monitoring. The biggest one, I think, is SB 1000 and House Bill 1291. That's nutrient application rates. This bill was very terrifying. It basically upended all of the work that the University of Florida IFAS Extension did with producers and fertilizer companies and other stakeholders to establish these nutrient application rates in their best management practices for different agricultural producers, and said, if you get a certified crop advisor, they can advise you on how much fertilizer to use. And that basically trumps anything that would be in your best management practices. Recent changes have been that it's now limited to citrus. They are requiring the University of Florida IFAS Extension to study. It's really limited again to citrus was the main crop that was being affected. They're limited. They want UF to do some more research, put together a new recommendations for phosphorus, and then there's a sunset on that certified crop advisor allowance to 2027. So it's not as scary, especially in the northern part of the state, because we don't grow a lot of citrus up here, but it is still potentially detrimental to the Indian River Lagoon. So that one we're still watching. It's going to be heard, I think, on Thursday. The SB 1000 will be heard in the Senate committee. Then the seagrass mitigation bill, we're hearing that this one's kind of on the way out. We were concerned because basically it said development can occur, and as long as the developer paid for seagrass mitigation in sovereign submerged lands in areas that were already under conservation. Excuse me. So we know that seagrass mitigation isn't successful in Florida. I want to say it's something like 30% of the time it's successful globally. So it just wasn't, it was well-intentioned, but not a good bill. SB 1426 and House Bill 965, water quality enhancement, allows basically some credit trading for water quality based stormwater type projects. Our concern is that it focuses on technologies to improve water quality after the pollutants are already in there, rather than preventing them getting them in the water at all. And then just as unfortunate as what is being pushed forward are the things that aren't being pushed forward. And that would be Senate Bill 832 and House Bill 561, implementation of the recommendations of the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. The Senate version has passed its first two committees, but the House hasn't taken this up at all. And then more local to you all, you might be following the Putnam biosolids application. That's going to be heard by the Zoning Board of Adjustments at the Putnam County Commission on February 16th at 3 o'clock. And then there is a bill in the federal, at the federal level, the Manatee Protection Act, and that's intent is to relist the manatee as endangered. So that would typically the Fish and Wildlife Service is responsible for that action. And in this situation, it would be a legislatively designated action. Have some more ways for you to help here. I'll just kind of put them out. We have an adoption program. If you're not aware, Save the Manatee Club, Adopt a Manatee. All of that money goes to our partner organizations. We're part of what is called the Manatee Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership. So we work with a number of groups throughout the state and into other areas in the United States to rehabilitate these animals when they need it. And so most of those funds go to that. We have free educational materials. If you're part of a boat club or you live on the water, feel free to request those from us and we'll send them off to you, and just sign up on our website. And that is all I think for my presentation. Thanks so much for listening.
Kim, thank you so much. I've got a ton of questions myself, and I'll give everybody time to get their questions into the chat too. First of all, we do have a question asking for your website.
Okay,
and
put it in the
if
chat.
You could put that in the chat, that would be very helpful. I've also got in the chat a link to join Sierra. Your $15 to join Sierra really helps us as well. And also we've got a link to a kayak we're going to be doing as a Sierra Club at Blue Springs State Park on Saturday, February 26th for anybody that would like to do that. We've got the link there too. And Kate Hurlbut is asking if this PowerPoint could be available for educators, and it's got lots of good up-to-date info in it.
Sure. I can't remember if this was done as a webinar. I can provide it to you all. I can also look on the website. We have a webinars link, but I can certainly provide it to you to give to the group.
That'd be great. That'd be great. And I would like to ask, when we were kayaking a while back, we saw a manatee pulling itself out of the water up onto the bank to eat something.
Yeah.
Do you know what it was doing?
I mean, they do. They're not selective. They'll get what they they use their their fins to kind of propel themselves through the water, and they'll do the same thing to kind of lift themselves out. So it's not necessarily uncommon for them to do that.
So it's not indicative of lack of food in the water.
No, I mean, well, where were you?
Okay. We were in Green Cove Springs and a little tributary there.
Okay. I would be more concerned about the body condition, because they can travel, they can migrate and just kind of getting to Green Cove Springs. I mean, I guess I say that it's not uncommon for manatees to kind of push themselves out of the water to get to hanging vegetation. But there is a seagrass crisis in the St. Johns River as well. So it hasn't been as pronounced, and we're not seeing animals, die at the same rate up there. But especially in the wintertime, they tend to travel further south. But I guess, I would just say to pay attention, but that's not uncommon.
Okay, thank you. And Vicki is asking, although education is always needed, she says, why not apply a donation/tax per bag of fertilizer to go towards saving the manatees to be used at rescue centers and planting grasses?
Yeah,
that's a great question. Why? I mean, it's all this fertilizer that's causing the algal blooms.
Yeah, I mean, that I think would have to be something that the legislature would take up. And then, of course, once the state gets a hold of those funds, where will they put them? I mean, chances are good that they would hopefully they'd put them toward the right thing. But they tend to get caught up and eaten up in other ways. You put together a trust fund, it goes somewhere else. It's, yeah, it's unfortunate.
I'm curious also, we're feeding the manatees apparently romaine lettuce in that one power plant area.
Yeah.
Is that are they going to try the same thing elsewhere or do something in this moment to feed starving animals?
Yeah, at this point, they are looking for other places to locate those feeding areas. It's one of the, it took, in our opinion, it took them too long to put together a plan. And so we're kind of having to play some catch up, which is unfortunate. It took the animals a little while to start eating the food. And there's a lot of concern about making them habituated to humans. So really there's just, it's trying to catch that balance of being able to feed them, but not associating that with humans. So where humans can get to, oftentimes, they don't necessarily want to set those places up as feeding areas, because then you just have a lot of people, it's a little, I can't say for sure what FWC is doing, but I do know that they're looking for other locations. They're looking for some areas in Satellite Beach that might be more accessible, where we have a lot of manatees in some of those canals.
Seems like starvation is more important than worrying about a lot of these other
Yes.
issues.
Well, I think it's also important to remember that this is like unprecedented. There haven't been feeding programs like this for other animals, and other marine mammals have suffered unusual mortality events. They just typically aren't associated with things like lack of food because of human activity. And so that's why the justification has come in to say, look, this is a human caused issue, and we need to, as humans, do something to mitigate it, as small as it might be.
That's good. Kate also asks, how is this lack of food affecting birth rate?
Yeah, I think it's going to take a while to figure that out. I can tell you that we've seen more orphans this past year than in previous years, because the mothers become so malnourished that they're not able to care for their young and also sustain life. So we're seeing more and more orphans. We have a lot of babies at Blue Springs, so that's exciting, but I don't know how that compares to previous years.
Okay. Rita is asking, why won't Florida require cages on boat motors to prevent manatee injury? Another great question.
Boat lobbyists. I mean, the argument is that these high performance boats can't perform as well when there's a cage on the motor. We have seen a decrease in manatee strike. Well, I shouldn't say that. Most manatees have boat strike indications, and some of them have been struck more than 10 times in their lifetime. So all we can do is advocate for people putting those prop guards on their boats when they're able to, if they're willing, and then just really pay attention to those speed zones.
Yeah, and Kate also says she has a brother-in-law who hates manatees because he can't go real fast in his boat.
I know. I always say, you know what? You can't go real fast in your car either. Your car can go faster, answer. But we're okay. I don't know.
Great answer. Yeah. So there's still no prevention going on. So this will continue to happen since we're not stopping the algal blooms at the source.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but it was a long time coming. I mean, it's been over a decade since we knew that these algal blooms were persisting. And unfortunately, manatees are kind of at the top of they're not a predator, but they're kind of at the top. So when you start thinking about manatees dying because of lack of forage, you start thinking about all the other things that are suffering as well. Turtles, fisheries, fish. I mean, all the things that depend on those seagrasses, which are some of the most prolific ecosystems on the planet. They're likened to the rainforests of the water. So it's just a tragic scenario that we're in.
Yes, Logan, go ahead.
I've got a question. As I led off this event when I gave my introductory comments, one of our goals is to get a lot of the power plants as we know them decommissioned. Mm-hmm. And as you were presenting, I started thinking, well, if we're successful in getting these power plants replaced or decommissioned, that's going to escalate this diminution of the amount of warm water locations for them. Yeah. So what is the thinking on that? I mean, I would hate for us to be very successful in doing doing away with power plants, but in the process be further damaging the manatee. So what's the thinking on that?
Yeah, Fish and Wildlife Commission put together a warm water action plan with some input from a number of groups, and they worked on that for probably 5 years before putting out a draft in 2019. It's a lot of fluff. There's not a whole lot of, we're definitely going to do this, we're definitely going to do that. There are some, the Rodman Reservoir is identified in there. Opening up those springs for additional habitat is identified, but there's no specific actionable item or timeline. So that's something that Save the Manatee Club is continuing to advocate for, is to really get some legs behind that warm water action plan and figure out what the heck we're going to do. I mean,
Logan?
Another question is, if the Free the Aqua campaign is successful, and let's say the Rodman Dam comes down and a lot of those natural springs are restored, will that lead to a substantial increase in manatee habitat by virtue of making those spring waters more available, or will it really not have that big impact on manatee habitat?
well, again, those 20 springs will provide warm water habitat through the winter time. And we know that a free flowing river provides warmer water in the winter and cooler water in the summer than a stagnant, large pond. So while researchers are very reluctant to say how many more manatees could be supported in that system, we know that many hundreds more is the kind of the statement that they're making. Manatees could have habitat in that system. A lot of those 20 springs are fairly small. But when you look at places like Three Sisters or other natural springs where manatees congregate, they will pack themselves in there. Blue Spring is a prime example. We had 700 manatees in Blue Spring last week or the week before last, and it's a pretty small run. So I think that, I think that it could certainly support more than it has, which now is like 100 animals. So we can easily expect to have more than that. They have to knock on the door of the dam and go, "Hi, let me in," and hope that somebody opens it.
Also, Vicki has a great idea. She said to bring more attention to the manatees, how about getting DeSantis to implement a Save the Manatee Day? He could get accolades for also applying the tax per bag of fertilizer and manufacturers. And in turn, the manufacturers could be allowed to put a logo on their product saying they donate to manatees and to use fertilizer wisely and look good as PR to the community, or in the community.
Yeah, I don't know how that would look, but I can tell you that Save the Manatee Club came out of a gubernatorial effort to save the manatees when Bob Graham was governor. He met up with Jimmy Buffett and formed this Save the Manatee Committee, which was kind of a quasi governmental organization that brought together a number of groups, including the boat industries. No fertilizer representatives, as far as I know, because nobody was putting that piece together. But that's kind of how Save the Manatee evolved. We were kind of this initiative by the governor under the umbrella of Audubon, and then became our own organization. So yeah, I'd love to have DeSantis do that. He likes to, to his credit, we have more funding for water quality restoration projects this year than we have in the past. I mean, the Everglades are getting more money in the single year than they ever have. But we also know that there's a lot of infrastructure money coming from the federal government, and we want to get our hands on it. So we just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get as much money as possible.
Let's see, we've got a couple messages, couple chats. Carol Hughes says she found this online. Every year on the fourth Wednesday of March, it's Manatee Appreciation Day, a day dedicated to learning about appreciating and helping these gentle giants. Manatees continue to face many threats, from habitat loss to watercraft collisions. And Diane Battles says extreme mortality is clustered in IRL. Should the focus also be on these areas that are clearly threats to manatees? I don't know about offsetting habitat for loss of cooling towers and power plants, but it seems that we have some serious issues here.
Yeah, I mean, there is a focus, but it's been diluted over the years on the power plants and needing to set up alternate habitat areas where the manatees normally would be. So the IRL obviously is getting a lot of attention, but as I mentioned, we are very concerned about the status of SAV in the St. Johns River and other areas along the East Coast there.
Can you guys use fewer acronyms for those of us?
I'm sorry. Did I say what? Tell me which one I used.
SAB?
Oh, submerged aquatic vegetation.
Okay.
Sorry.
And the IRL is the Indian River Lagoon.
Yes,
I'm
Indian
assuming.
River Lagoon.
Perfect.
Sorry, I didn't say
Okay.
that. Oh yeah, I mean, uncontrolled development, not having growth management that's enforced and implementable is probably the biggest threat to Florida's, the Florida ever. It is just, it's a domino effect. There is, everything's affected. I don't know.
Yeah, Vicky says that very same thing. She says, the problem I see is the growth of Florida and that it could get out of control, hurting our manatees even more. That's what you're saying.
Sorry, yes, that's what I was responding to.
Could get out of control.
Yeah, I know. And Rita says, fundamentally, it comes down to people lining their pockets. Look what's happened to South Florida, my hometown, that I no longer recognize. That is so true. Logan.
Okay, I think we're getting close to kind of the end of this session. We try to keep them at about 60 minutes. And we've been monitoring the chat. I would say before we completely close out, if somebody is out there who has a question they're seriously considering, you can either raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask a question.
We're good.
What would you say, Kim, that we should all do that would make the most impact? Should we be calling? Who should we be calling? What do we need to take away to do?
Well, I think you're just locally where you are, maybe look up Don't Poop on Putnam if you're not already familiar with that campaign. That biosolids, again, they're meeting on it tomorrow. It's a biosolids application. When I say biosolids application, I mean applying biosolids to the land. They have some regulations that they have to adhere to, but basically what it is trucking in human waste that's been processed through a wastewater treatment facility and then from some other area and bringing it into Putnam County. That's just not sustainable. It's like the first rule of sustainability. You can't bring things from one place to the next and think that it's going to work out okay. So that would probably be my first just initial action. And then, if you want to get involved in the political process, discourage the governor. I do believe that SB 1000 will probably get to the governor's desk. The Florida Springs Council is going to have a pretty robust veto. Well, they were. I don't know now that they're limiting it to citrus if they will be as concerned, but I would pay attention to that one and just encourage a straight up veto. So much money has been spent on those best management practices and IFAS recommendations that it just doesn't make sense to give somebody with a certificate a blanket authorization to say you can fertilize as much as you want. So those would be the two big ones I would say this year.
Okay. Yes. And Logan, go ahead.
All right. And on a local level, I think these may be a little bit tangentially related, but you could get involved in a campaign that's very important to this region, which is Free the Ocklawaha.
Oh, yes.
And the St. Johns Riverkeeper is kind of the lead organization in that. But other things pressure the city to start getting serious about converting septic tanks to the overall city drainage system or sewer system. And also any area that maybe can help lessen the amount of fertilizer runoff, which is a big problem here in Jacksonville as well. So on the local level, any campaigns that focus on those, I would think would have some benefit as well.
Use
Um,
natives. They don't need any fertilizer.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Can I ask a
Okay.
question, make a comment?
what?
On March 3rd, the Native Plant Society, you guys, Sierra Club and Audubon and the Garden Club of Jacksonville are having a multi-organization program in the evening on March 3rd it will be in person at the Garden Club and via Zoom. So if you want to watch via Zoom, you can. We're having Doug Tallamy talk about the whole idea of homegrown national park. If we all plant a few natives, that helps support wildlife. Planting native also cuts down on fertilizer. So that directly affects what we're talking about. What we're going to have, if you actually come to the Garden Club, is we're going to have a native plant sale. So there'll be information about how to get started with planting natives and then natives for sale. So for people that are not sure where to get started, it will be a great event for that. The Doug Tallamy presentation is free. He's really he's one of he's my hero after John Muir. It's going to be a great presentation. And I know Lisa has sent everybody information about the program, and March 3rd, put on your calendars.
Thank you for that. And one
Right,
last
and-
thing, Linda Chipperfield just gives you a link to Jimmy Buffett and contact him.
And Diane Battle's got her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Diane.
No, that's okay. You know, the biosolids is not just a problem in Putnam County. It's a problem in counties where there is farming, period. You can look across the river and it's been allowed. I don't know how much is actively happening, but there's, Riverkeeper tried to keep that, prohibited, but it isn't. And along the same lines, bioliquids, in an attempt to conserve water, the water, I guess the water treatment plants and the water utilities are being charged with coming up with a program or a plan to implement reclaimed water for lawn irrigation, because heaven forbid we should give up our St. Augustine grass. So this is now we're going to be, for the new communities, you'll have these purple pipes. Purple pipes are coming, and Lord knows what's in them because they've been minimally treated, but don't drink the water. And that's going back into the St. Johns River and all the tributaries and the watershed. So we don't know what the effects of that, there's certainly going to be nutrients that are going to add to that nutrient load. And if you live in a new community and you need to water something, or you want to water something, that's what you'll be watering with. So another happy thought. I don't know how we can, I think Thousand Friends of Florida has been trying to fight this, but rather than really conserve and plant native and not water our lawns, we're going to end up putting in reclaimed water. So that will go on our lawns. And don't plant a vegetable garden. That's all I have to say. You don't want to
Okay.
eat the vegetables.
Okay, well, Lisa, unless you've got something else you'd like to add, I think we probably have reached the end of the meeting. I want to say this has been just very, very informative. We appreciate you, Kim, coming and giving us this presentation. If you get a chance, or maybe we can figure out if there is in fact a transportable PowerPoint or something associated with this, as some of our members asked, that might be helpful. But I'll just reiterate, thank you all for coming tonight. We certainly appreciate it when we offer an event like this. We hope you found it very helpful. The Sierra Club does not charge anything for these events or our outings or anything. So all we ask and would encourage you to do is help support some of the Sierra Club activities and stay involved. Thank you all for coming tonight, and we very much appreciate it all. Have a good evening, everybody.